Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today. This is Charlie from YouGov. I'm the head of client service for our US data products team, and welcome to our marketing campaign effectiveness webinar. Thanks everyone for joining so promptly. I'm going to be starting in just a few moments, just as we allow people to file in. But thanks for taking part today, and welcome to the first webinar in our 2018 series focused around our plan and track framework. As I said, we're going to begin in just a few seconds, just waiting for a few other people to dial in, and then we're going to get started. So just to run through some very quick housekeeping as we're waiting to get started. You've probably all noticed by now that everyone is set on mute. We've done that just to minimize any background noise, but we would welcome any questions you have. So what we've actually done is enabled the questions panel on the right-hand side of the screen there in the control area. You're going to see a questions panel, and that's where we'd love to hear your questions about the content that I'm working through. I'm going to pause periodically to review those questions and see if there's anything you'd like me to go into a little bit more detail on. Another couple of quick bits of housekeeping. We are recording this session, and we will be making the slides available. Likely we'll be sending those out early next week. As a reminder, this is a client-wide webinar, so any questions that might be somewhat more proprietary, I suggest following up with after the session. As I said, please do feel free to add those questions, and I'll be reviewing those periodically. If you do have anything more in depth, we'd love to hear from you after the webinar, so please reach out to your client service representative, and they'll be able to walk you through this in more detail. But we will be sharing these slides, and we will be sharing the recording early next week. All right, so I think we've probably got about everyone in that's going to be in. We may have people dripping in throughout, but I'll recap towards the end about sharing those slides. So thanks again, everyone, for dialing in and joining this webinar. As I said, this is the first in our 2018 series, and today we're going to be talking about marketing campaign effectiveness. So just to recap on the agenda for today, what we're going to do is begin with just a refresher of our YouGov plan and track framework. So everybody on the line should be familiar with who we are and what we do, but we'll just recap on that and where this particular capability fits into that framework. The main focus of today is about how do you measure ROI, and we're going to start by defining the measure of success. So before we've even begun, trying to learn a little bit more about how do we best define success. We're then going to walk you through a case study, which is based on some real data. It's all, of course, anonymized, but we're going to be showing how we can link audience exposure from a television campaign to brand performance. We're also going to identify how you can see those key insights and learnings that will allow you to optimize either that current campaign in real time or future campaigns. All right, so just to begin with and just to take a half step back, we're talking about our plan and track framework here. So everybody on the line is obviously already a subscriber to our YouGov services that allow you to work through this sort of flow of how you're going to engage your consumers or work with your brands. So it starts with identifying, describing, and targeting. That's via our profiles tool with the ability to do dynamic segmentations, find those audiences that you're looking for, learn everything you'd want to know about them, including an in-depth media plan that allows you then to target and most effectively reach those types of people. We also have that execute phase, allowing you to actually go out and buy against audiences that you're identifying in the digital space. It's not something we're going to be talking about today, but if that's of interest, again, suggest reaching out to your client service representative. Today, we're going to be talking about measuring and evaluating. So this is where we're actually able to track those key metrics over time and ultimately evaluate your campaign success, looking to identify and really quantify that ROI. And that's what we're calling marketing campaign effectiveness. So I want to start by walking through the methodology or the process that we go through to actually run these marketing campaign effectiveness capabilities. This is something everybody's able to do right now. This is all part of your login with regards to being a brand index and profile subscriber. So it begins with defining success. And we're going to talk about this a little more in a short while to really think about how do we actually understand whether or not a campaign was successful and what are the targets we should be setting ourselves. The real process, though, begins with the media plan. So as I said, today we're going to be talking specifically about television campaigns. We do have capabilities of doing this with digital content, and that's what we can talk about on another day. But right now we're going to be talking about using a television media plan to actually go out and measure performance. So what we're able to do is take your television media plan and then code that against our respondents to identify those who are potentially exposed. So they've told us every day what it is they're watching on television. What we're then able to do is say, well, we know that they were watching the television show at the time that you were advertising on that television show or shows, to allow ourselves to find that brand uplift in real time. So coding that media plan against our brand index results allows us to see those potentially exposed respondents. These are the people we know to have been watching the TV shows upon which your campaign was airing. Now, of course, we are talking about self-reported data. We are talking about people who tell us that they watch those TV shows. Now, they did tell us that based on what they watched last night, so we're pretty confident that they were accurate in telling us something that they remember watching. I think everybody could probably say what they watched last night, but perhaps not what they watched last weekend or certainly 6 months ago. But asking respondents, what did you watch last night? And then comparing that against the media plan to see, were they potentially exposed? We're also then able to evaluate the reach, and we're going to go through these different steps on this webinar today with a real case study. But that final phase is then taking that pool of potentially exposed respondents and actually learning who did we reach and were they in line with that defining of success at the beginning in terms of who we wanted to go out and find. So let's talk a little bit more about defining the measure of success of the campaign, and then I'm going to pause for questions and see if we have anything in that questions panel around that high-level methodology. As I said, we're going to go through that step by step in more detail as part of today's case study. So this question here is around, well, what is a good score? What is a good campaign? How do I know if this was successful or not? And there's a few ways we can approach defining success for your campaigns. And there's a few different options here, and we're going to work through these. So firstly, there's the comparisons to historical data. Now, this is one of the more obvious ones, but brand index in our historical data allows us to see, well, was the movement that we experienced around this campaign actually better, worse, or in line with previous campaigns that may have had a similar or even a different spend? That allows us to even account for seasonality, to see, for example, if we ran a holidays campaign this year, what did our brand uplift look like last year, and did we do even better this year? But it's also vitally important to compare against your key competitors, as well as even the broader brand list. So the idea here is that, of course, just talking about your own brand performance is really only part of the story. You need to see whether or not you were able to improve your scores whilst your competitors actually either stayed flat or even hopefully declined. If, of course, the entire set is moving upwards, it's more of a rising tide, and that's it. So getting that context of your competitive performance is really important to understanding whether or not the campaign was successful. Of course, often your competitors are running a campaign at the same time. We're also able to look at the broader brand list, and that's going to help us triangulate against really what a score could be. So if your ad awareness was, say, 20%, well, that might be good in comparison to your competitors who might be trending at, say, 15%. But actually, if we're seeing some of the really heavy advertisers up there hitting 50% or higher, it gives us that additional triangulation point to understand, again, what is a good score, what is a good reach, and what might that look like. It's also very important to be clear on who you want to reach. So, of course, often a campaign will go after a particular demographic. So setting your targets against those particular audience is an important part of understanding success. And our data allows you to drill into really any kind of audience you'd like to find to see whether or not it was a group that you were able to reach. It's also very important to define the right metrics. So with brand index, of course, we're tracking 16 metrics covering every step of the purchase funnel. So often your campaign might be aiming to simply raise awareness, in which case that's going to be the metrics you're going to want to look at: advertising awareness and overall aided brand awareness. But other times you're actually going to want to see whether or not you're moving people through the funnel. So are you having an impact on brand health and ultimately pushing people to be more likely to consider or intending to purchase your brand? And that's something we're going to come back to a little bit later with our particular case study. And finally, there's the opportunity for custom questions. So if your campaign was looking to address a very specific, quite niche idea about what you wanted to achieve with that campaign, you have the opportunity to add those questions into our brand index survey and actually find out whether or not you're seeing any lifts on those rather custom measures. Of course, in order to do that, you'd want to establish a pre-campaign baseline whereby you've got maybe around a month's worth of fielding of that custom metric before the campaign hits, so you're able to see that pre versus post analysis. So a few different areas to focus on when we think about how do we define success of the campaign. So before we move into the case study, I'm just going to pause for a moment and take a look at our questions panel and see if we have anything that folks would like to ask around. All right, here, let's see what we've got. All right, so one of the questions we've got here is around what do we do if a campaign is running across multiple shows at the same time? So the question here I'm going to sort of build around is this idea of, well, how granular is our TV show data? And what we're doing is we're actually surveying based on every single TV show that that respondent watched the night before. So what we do with our TV show data is we begin by asking respondents every day on the back of the brand index survey, did you watch television last night? Now, if they say yes, we're going to ask them, well, what part of the day did you watch? And this is going to also include streaming and catch-up services. So if they tell us that they said, well, I watch TV at prime time as well as daytime, we're then going to ask follow-up questions based on, well, what did you watch during prime time and what did you watch during daytime? And we show them the TV shows that were aired during that time of the day the night before. It's a very user-friendly, good respondent experience to actually see thumbnails of the different TV shows, the top TV shows during that time. And they can cycle through and even type in to say, oh, I watched this show or I watched that show. And they build out a list of everything they watched the night before. So what that means is we're able to find and align with your media plan to say, well, we were airing our adverts on this TV show on this network. And we're able to then see, here are the people that we know to have been watching that TV show, building out that potentially exposed audiences. Now, in some cases, we'd even be able to split it out. You might be running different spots on different TV shows, and you'd actually be able to see that through the granularity of our TV show data. One of the early steps in this process is to review your media plan and talk about how we want to code those variables to identify those potentially exposed respondents. So hopefully that answers the question. If not, please do follow up with your client service representative or have a chat with us offline and we'll be able to go into more detail. All right, so let's move through to the case study. So this case study is how we were able to measure the ROI and campaign effectiveness of a TV show campaign. So this was a popular CPG brand. They're running this TV campaign, and they actually developed that plan against our profiles data. So they were able to say, this is the audience we want to reach. These are the shows that we think they're going to be watching based on our profiles data. This is where we're going to find statistical differentiators or opportunities to reach them in an effective, cost-efficient way. That looked to reach a particular demographic and move them through the purchase funnel. So thinking about defining success, in this case, we wanted to see improvements across every step and actually end up with more people considering to buy the brand as a result of the campaign. It started with them sharing that media plan, which we were then able to look through and code up into that variable that we could then add into the brand index tool to identify that lift amongst those potentially exposed respondents, a lift that we certainly hope to see. We then analyzed that again. The KPI. So phase one, we're going to go for a few different phases here. The very top of the line, did we break through? So actually looking at that media plan, we were, as I said, able to create that potentially exposed audience. And I stressed the word potentially. We don't know if they left the room during the advert break or didn't remember seeing it, but we're starting by saying, well, here are the potentially exposed audience. We know they were watching the TV shows upon which we aired our commercial during the time that we were airing said commercial. And what you can see here in the pink bar, these are those potentially exposed respondents, and we're comparing to a Gen Pop baseline. And at the high level analysis, it's phase one, we can see that great news. We did see a statistically significant improvement in ad awareness amongst that potentially exposed group and a significant improvement in aided awareness. Now, the baseline we're using here of Gen Pop really is an idea of sort of more of a natural baseline. This is just in the absence of anything else. This is the sort of scores we see across the general population. You could build in any kind of baseline you want. And as you see, as we move through this analysis, we're going to get into some more direct and important baselines to triangulate your performance. But this is the starting point. Did we break through? And the good news in this case was yes. But now we're going to drill deeper. Now we're actually going to isolate those respondents who said that they watched the TV shows, so they were potentially exposed. But crucially, we can also couple in that they told us they saw an advert for the brand. So it's a pretty ironclad definition of someone that we think or expect to have seen the commercial, because not only were they watching the TV shows upon which your commercial was running, they also told us that they saw a commercial for the brand. So this audience now we're able to see with this view of did we get a lift around the campaign. And what we're looking at here in the darker pink is the pre. So again, these are the respondents that were watching those TV shows. And this is before the campaign even began. But they were watching the TV shows and they were aware of advertising. Then we move into the light pink bar, which is during the campaign. So during the 90-day window in which this campaign was running, at the end of that, we then said, well, what were the scores from that same type of person? So they were watching those TV shows and they were aware of the advertising. Well, what do we see then? And the good news is you can see statistically significant increases at those higher funnel metrics, as well as the brand health metrics. But you'll notice that we didn't quite get those significant increases in the lower funnel measures of purchase consideration or purchase intent. So we're going to come back to that in a short while. But the point I want to stress here, and why it's important to think about your campaigns in this way, is by simply saying, did we do well amongst people watching these TV shows? Well, people who watch those TV shows were chosen for a reason. They're likely to have been people you've looked at and said, we think they're going to like our brand. That's why we're choosing those TV shows. For example, if it was, say, a pet food brand and you were airing your adverts on, say, Animal Kingdom, well, they're probably going to be more aligned with pet brands anyway. And so your brand affinity scores should really be higher amongst that audience. But by looking at it this way, by looking at the pre versus the during amongst that same group of potentially exposed respondents, one where we know there was no commercial and the during when there was, we're able to really isolate that difference. We can then triangulate one step further by actually comparing against the non-ad aware. So I know this is getting a tiny bit complicated, but what we're looking at now is same people, they're watching those same TV shows during the time that the campaign was airing, but the crucial difference is that they said they didn't see an advert. So these are, again, the same type of people in terms of why you chose those TV shows, but this time we can know that they didn't see the advert and compare them to those who said that they did see an advert. And we can identify here the, again, significant substantial lifts that we saw across the board, even at the lower funnel side with indexes around the 3x mark, even better around some of these lower funnel metrics such as buzz, really showing quite substantial growth, 10x that of what we saw amongst the non-ad aware. So a very good way to measure that ROI. Phase 3, and again, I'm going to pause for questions in just a moment, but phase 3 then went into finding who do we reach. So this is coming back to the idea of the targets that we set, trying to reach a particular type of audience and finding out whether or not we did. And in this case, this was good news. The client did want to reach females of this kind of age range, and this was the sort of person they hoped to get hold of. So we're looking now again at those same respondents. They were potentially exposed to the campaign because they were watching the TV shows upon which your commercial was airing during the time that the commercials were running on those TV shows. And we can see that they did skew in the directions we hoped they would. Female and that particular age range, lower earners and based primarily or over-indexing on being based in the South. We can also see what customers, what brands that are also shopping. This is just the tip of the iceberg. As most of you will know, we track around 1,500 brands in the US alone. But picking out some of the top brands here, we can see some big ones like McDonald's or Walmart or Walgreens. Taking a look at some attitudinal statements, we can see they like owning good quality products, they do read and watch the news, and we can see that they make an effort to support American businesses, which certainly ties in with some of the customers, some of the brands that they certainly over-index on. We can then drill down even deeper, so thinking more specifically about their personality. And the good news here was we did see that this audience was statistically more likely to feel that advertising helps them choose what to buy. So this was a good group to reach in that sense. We also see some other opportunities for thinking toward future campaigns where direct mail might be effective, given they also over-index on being influenced by receiving letters, but also noticing advertisements in newspapers. Negative traits and positive traits, we can see a few here that stick out as far as what they like about themselves and what they don't like about themselves. And it's, again, a far bigger set of data that you could drill into. The final phase of this analysis is going to dig into the concept I referenced earlier, that although this campaign was successful at pushing people through the funnel as far as generating awareness, people saw the advert, those who did see the advert were finding very high buzz scores, very high brand health scores, but there was that blockage. We weren't able to move the needle on consideration. So let's take a look at that audience. We can actually find out, well, who were those people? We found them in terms of they were aware of our advertising. They like us, they had a positive brand impression, but they're not a considerer. So how could we do better with this group? The problem wasn't in reaching them. The problem was more perhaps in the content, or actually finding something that resonated or pushed them to say, I'm now going to go and buy this product. So what can we learn about them? Well, they also show that kind of patriotism or pride to be an American, again, making an effort to support American businesses and going to be perhaps patronizing brands that are, again, more domestic. But we also see, as far as content strategy, they do enjoy watching ads starring their favorite celebrity. So this was a thought. Maybe we could include some sort of spokesperson in our next campaigns that would encourage this particular person to buy those products. We probably think they should be American as well. So let's find out who they like. So we can actually use the profiles data to drill down one level further. and see, well, actually the celebrities that they over-index on being fans of include Denzel Washington, Sarah Jessica Parker, and even George Clooney. Now, these might not be the cheapest spokespeople to go after, but they are the ones that we would see as having high favorability amongst this audience that we're trying to reach. We can also find out a few other things. For instance, they're really passionate about the Olympics. This is, of course, quite timely, given we're not too far away now from the Winter Olympics. So if we're thinking about our next steps and anything we might do to refine our future campaigns, we have a thought here already towards the next strategy of reaching this audience. And again, we can drill in deeper. We know they're going to probably be watching the Olympics. We have a lot of data around the Olympics, as well as any major sporting event. So we can find out what they like. So these are their favorite Summer Olympic sports. Now, of course, the Winter Olympics is next up, so we can look at it for the Winter Olympics. But at the time of this commercial, at the time of this campaign, this case study, we were more focused on the summer. And in this case, we could see that actually they were likely to be watching swimming events, basketball events, as well as rowing events. So lots of opportunity to think about how do we refine or work on our next campaign. So I promised I was going to pause the questions again. I wanted to just summarize that what we just worked through there was this end-to-end connected data solution. So it began with segmenting and profiling the audiences. We developed that media plan. We isolated those respondents and validated their audience exposure, and then evaluated the success. We even then moved on to the next steps as far as thinking about future campaigns. So with that said, let me pause again and check our question panel and see if we have any other questions. All right, so looks like we have a question here around industry or category norms. So that's a great question, and it's an area where, again, because of the breadth of data that we have and the fact that we've always, we're always on and we're tracking 45 different industries across the US, we would have a sense of industry norms. And this could be approached in a few different ways. I mean, one is looking back at known campaigns that were run across some key competitors in those industries. But the other would be to think about, well, if there's a group of brands that are really that industry or even a sub-industry, we could see the typical ad awareness increases that they're seeing around those key advertising seasons to isolate, are we in line with these norms? So essentially, yes, this is an area we could dig deeper into to see whether or not we can triangulate against those industry norms. Again, if I haven't answered that fully, feel free to follow up offline. Just seeing what else we have. All right, so let's see here. We've got so we've got a question here about whether or not we've done any pre or post analysis around showing advertisements in cinemas, and would we take a similar approach? So it's an area where we do actually collect a lot of data. For instance, we do isolate a segment or an audience that tells us that they love watching previews and pay particular attention to that. So thinking about that as a strategy is absolutely an area we could support you on. We also collect data on their movie habits that would help us to see which movies we think they might be going to see, and then thinking about what would be an effective placement as far as which movies or where even we should be looking to place those commercials. As far as whether or not we'd be able to isolate the potentially exposed respondents, well, it would probably require some degree of customization to survey respondents, perhaps even recontacting respondents that we think might be relevant. But that would be one where probably we go down more of a custom path to find those people that were exposed to any kinds of cinema campaigns. Let's see else. Okay, so we've got another question here about how far back we can go to track campaigns. So it's a good question. I mean, in Brand Index, we launched in 2007 in the US. So in that sense, we can go back a long, long way. As far as when we had our extensive media data, if we want to layer in that kind of exposure audience, that's something that we could probably go back to mid-2016 with, when we expanded our profiling capabilities. So yes, we can go back in time, and that's, I think, one of the advantages here is, although in the perfect world, we'd sit down with you in advance of the campaign and talk about success and talk about the media plan, even influencing the media plan. But in other cases, we know that's not always possible. So if we need to retroactively look at defining that audience and going back in time, we can do that because we've been collecting the data, including that media consumption information. Okay, let's just see if we've got any more. So the question here about digital tracking. So yes, as I said, digital tracking is something we can do. It's something that would be better to discuss offline, but it's something we're able to look at using our pixel tracking capabilities. So same kind of concept, but this time we're validating audience exposure against our pixel tracking capabilities, or we refer to this as YouGov Validate. but we're able then to see those respondents and do the same kind of analysis, as well as recontacting them to say, hey, what did you think about that campaign that we know that you saw? All right, let's see if we've got any other questions. I'm going to just sort of, as we review the last couple of questions, just in the sake of making sure I've shown you everything, I just do want to remind everyone that this is part of our 2018 webinar series. And so next up, we do have dynamic segmentation. So if anyone's interested in the ideas of how do I actually segment my population, my brand, my customer, we're going to be doing some exciting stuff around dynamic segmentations using our up-to-date, continually growing and fresh data to segment and understand more about how you could reach those people. So that should be in around 3 months' time. For anyone that did join after my initial housekeeping, we will be sharing these slides. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar sometime early next week. Just going to go back to our questions panel, see if we have any more questions coming through. It's great to see such an engaged audience here. All right, let's see what else we have here. All right, so what other platforms can we track on digital? So we can embed the pixel on any of your digital content. So in that sense, there's no limitation around that area, though, of course, it requires us to be in partnership with you around where we can embed those pixels based on where you're looking to actually track digital content. As many of you may know, with our profiling tool, we're also able to, and continually are, monitoring people's online behaviors. So a subset of our panel having downloaded software onto their smartphones, tablets, PCs, any device that they're using to access the internet to tell us where they're going online. So that's, as I said, software-based, it's not cookie-based, and it allows us to monitor cross-platform their digital behavior. Though the pixel tracking discussion would be more of a separate idea. All right, so turnaround time, and let's see what else here. So turnaround time, as well as implications from a, do I need to subscribe to various platforms? And it looks like there's another question here around, is there a cost? So in terms of, do you need to subscribe in order to utilize this capability, you would need to be a plan and track subscriber. And by plan and track, I mean accessing both our brand index platforms so we can track and measure, as well as our profiling tools so we can layer in that media consumption data and understand more about who you reached. So in that sense, you would need to be a subscriber to our full plan and track capabilities. Turnaround time, it's actually pretty quick. It depends on what your definition of quick is, but we are, as I said, always on, so that's the good news. We're always collecting the data, so in that sense, there's not a great length of time that we need to wait for fieldwork to wrap up. Every day, fieldwork wraps up. In terms of the process, you know, once we've actually built that audience, that doesn't take too long based on your media plan. Once we've added that into the brand index survey, that's going to be updating every single day, so you can actually monitor these trends in real time. So that's the beauty of this, is that it is allowing you to be nimble and react very quickly in real time with how the brand is doing amongst that campaign. The post-analysis, of course, we need to wait till the campaign finishes, and then we just need to aggregate the data. Very quickly, you're going to see those initial pre versus post, because, of course, again, the fieldwork would have wrapped up the day that your campaign did, and then the next day we can pull that together. It really just depends on how comprehensive that analysis needs to be, and that's one where discussing timelines and deadlines with your client service team would be the best way to make sure it's meeting your exact needs. And then finally, there was a question around costs and if this costs anything. So the examples that we've worked through today are all part of the full plan and track framework. So the good news is that if you're a subscriber to both brand index and profiles, this is something you can do right away using those pre-built media consumption variables that are cut around 90-day periods, 60-day periods, or 30-day periods. So if your campaign was running for 90 days, 60 days, you'll be able to see right away, well, these are the people that were watching during that window. So in that sense, there is no cost attached. If you want to go deeper, do more custom work with this, ask more specific questions, even incorporate some form of more advanced pixel tracking, then that's where there may be some discussions around cost. But really today, I wanted to highlight the capabilities that everybody can do right away within their login for the full plan and track solution that we have here for our clients. All right, so I'm sensitive to time. I want to make sure everybody's going to enjoy the rest of their Friday. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. As I said, we'll be sharing the slides, we'll be sharing the recording. If you have any other questions, please feel free to follow up, as well as chatting with your friendly client service team to see if there's anything else here that we could work with you on. All right, thanks everybody for joining, and we're looking forward to talking to you again in our next 2018 webinar on dynamic segmentation.